let me stop there and open the floor up, if I might, on the idea that there is no wand. So we have to work together in an old-fashioned American way to fashion a solution. And I hope in the context of our discussion today, we can start to move toward problem solving. Thanks for your welcome, and sorry for my passion, but you can see I think the problems you grapple with and that are on your mind have been on my mind for a very long time. Thank you.
You're going to have to take the seat and keep the microphone.
Okay.
You may have arrived and found a 3x5 card on your seat. Please use that if you would like to submit a written question. We're also going to have oral questions from the audience. We'd like to alternate between the two of those opportunities. And I would start right off. Mr. Burson has requested that we call him Alan.
Please.
So Alan, thank you very much for that presentation. But would you please clarify, when you talk about patrolling between borders, where does Leelanau County fall in that description? And what is the border when Leelanau County is involved?
So Leelanau is obviously on the northern tier of states, and the Customs and Border Protection consists of three subparts. One is the Border Patrol. One of the Customs and Border Protection officers, and the third is the Air and Marine that patrol the water and the air. Customs and the ports of entry are the airports and seaports. So when you come back from abroad and there's a Customs and Border Protection officer in a blue uniform that are in the ports of entry, those are the CBP officers in the ports of entry. The green shirts, the Border Patrol agents, are the ones who are not in the ports of entry, but the ones who are out in the patrol area. That's different from the ICE people, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement people, who are the detectives. So for purposes of enforcement by Border Patrol agents, it's typically considered within 100 miles of the border is where you will see the Border Patrol agents operating. And that would account for the green shirts that you might see in the county, although correct me, are you within 100 miles of the Canadian border?
Michigan is.
Yeah, you are. What's that?
All of Michigan is being patrolled by the Border Patrol.
No, I don't think you're gonna find Border Patrol agents in Detroit, except that you're gonna see blue shirts at the ports of entry at the bridges. So, well, I guess they may have changed the policy. They may have changed the policy since I was the commissioner, but I'd be surprised to find them
Well, we have experience with people who have been deported by Border Patrol, who've been arrested by Border Patrol. And all of Michigan is considered border because of the international boundary with Canada. And they say that goes all the way around the whole mitten. And so Border Patrol is active throughout Michigan.
Well, I will look to confirm that, because it's inconsistent with my understanding. They will be at transport nodes in within 100 miles of the border, but I will ascertain that. If I stand corrected if I'm wrong.
Two people personally who were arrested in
By green
Traverse
shirts.
City,
By green shirts.
by Border Patrol.
No, you see, the people who are operating in the interior of the country belong to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They have national responsibilities, and they are operating all over the country. And their job, the removal operations, the enforcement and removal operations officers are part of ICE, and they do have national jurisdiction. That's a different agency than the Border Patrol.
That policy has changed. because I know people who have been arrested by Border Patrol, and they're taken to the Sioux, or they're taken to Jackson County, to various jails that are cooperating and serving as detention centers. That policy has changed, and people are detained is the actual word. They are arrested simply going about their business and simply because their status is irregular.
Okay, I think we can agree that, yeah, no, so whether it's Border Patrol or ICE, people are now being arrested and detained and deported throughout the interior of the interior of the country. Which particular officers are doing it? They're all from DHS. They're all federal officers, and they're all federal law enforcement officers with immigration responsibilities. I agree with that.
Thank you. That was an oral question from the audience, and I'd like to pass along a written question. When people come to the U.S. under a tourist visa, does anyone check to see that they leave within the time frame of their visa? Has the tracking of these visas changed?
So the overstay of visas, most of the people who are here illegally in the United States actually did not cross the border illegally, but came on a legal visa, a tourist visa or otherwise, and overstayed the visa. And in fact, we don't, until recently, we haven't been tracking that very effectively at all in terms of entry-exit. But there's an effort now to be able to do that. But no, there was no regular checking of when people came into the country and overstayed their visa, it was hard to know where they were.
So there's no database that follows an individual like following a credit card?
No.
Thank you.
How many people, could I ask a follow-up? How many
Yes.
people a day come into the United States?
A million people a day are processed into the United States at 327 ports of entry.
Thank you. Another question, oral question from the audience. Okay, we have a written one here. A two-part question. If our borders are more secure now than they've ever been, what's your opinion about the wall?
Now, so the fact is that we have, of the 1,900 miles of border between the United States and Mexico, we have 700 miles of fencing, but they're not walls except around urban areas. So you'll recall that I said in the early 90s, most people were coming through San Diego, Tijuana to get up to Los Angeles and then around the country, or through Texas from Chihuahua in Mexico through Juarez to El Paso and then up into the rest of Texas. When the enforcement action started, the idea was to actually direct the traffic out away from the cities so that the Border Patrol could enforce and apprehend more of the migrants entering illegally. That's why around our cities, in San Diego, for example, or El Paso, or Nogales, or Brownsville and McAllen, you see quite high walls that have deflected the traffic, the migrant traffic out into the countryside. Most of the 700 miles are actually Normandy-type fences to prevent trucks from moving across the border carrying contraband or irregular migrants. We don't need a great wall of China between the United States and Mexico. It's simply not necessary as a matter of security. The president is fixated on it because it's a political metaphor for this idea that the border is out of control. But it is no accident that there is not a single Democrat or Republican from the border states that is supporting the building of this wall. It would be an expenditure that is simply unwarranted based on the facts. This is Robert Frost in The Mending Wall actually put it well. Good fences make good neighbors, but you have to know what you're fencing in and what you're fencing out. And in this case, we have the technology across the border. We have the barriers in places where they need to be, and we don't need a great wall in the Big Bend of Texas, for example. We don't need a big wall in the Sonoran Desert. We actually have, as a result of bipartisan action over the last 25 years, we have a border that is reasonably secure. And given the new relationship that we have cooperating with Mexico, we don't need to block people, because very few people, relatively speaking, are getting into the country illegally now.
Would you clarify what a Normandy fence is? A Normandy
It's
fence?
a Normandy barrier is basically, you remember the barriers that were on the beach at Normandy that are depicted with to just prevent the vehicles from moving onto the beach? It's a type of fencing or barrier, actually.
Thank you. People with legitimate asylum claims are being denied the right to refuge as recognized by international law. Is that true or false?
Yeah, so this is the fact of the matter is, that we don't have the large majority of people who are trying to enter the country today are not Mexican. Mexico has the 13th largest economy in the world, and in fact, more Mexicans are leaving the United States voluntarily and involuntarily than are entering the United States legally or illegally. The large majority of people who are coming into the United States today are from Central America, from the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and they're basically fleeing the same conditions of poverty, violence, and seeking family reunification that drove Mexican migration for 70 years. There is a hole in our system. The hole in our system is that asylum, we basically have an asylum system without having the immigration court system that's capable of adjudicating this. So let me give you an example of, or a longer exposition of what I mean. When you come to the, basically, first you have refugee. The international refugees are the same as asylees. The standard was the same. But a refugee is someone whose claim is adjudicated outside the United States. An asylum claim is adjudicated by presenting yourself at the border of the United States and claiming asylum. And what you do is you come and you say, I am claiming asylum, and the first test of that is what's called a credible fear standard. And it's a relatively low standard in which a citizenship and immigration officer will interview the person and make a determination as to whether or not there is a credible claim that needs to then be adjudicated in a longer immigration court proceeding. And the standard is relatively low, so that 80% of the people who claim credible fear of asylum, of persecution, actually are granted that. Once you are granted, once you establish credible fear, you're then paroled into the country to wait for an immigration hearing. But because we don't have enough immigration judges, those hearings are scheduled 2, 3, and 4 years in the future. Justice delayed is justice denied, and what we see has been an abuse by smugglers, and there are plenty of people who are entitled to asylum, but what's happened is because the system is broken, our immigration court system is broken, the word has gotten out in immigration, in communities in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, by smugglers who get paid $7,000 to $10,000 or $12,000 to bring people to the border, come up to the border and claim asylum. So that when you see people coming to the border now, to the United States, they don't try to avoid Border Patrol agents. They actually try to find Border Patrol agents to claim asylum. This is a situation that I think President Trump has properly responded to as inappropriate. While I'm not a great fan of his travel bans, particularly directed to one or another group of people, the fact of the matter is that the asylum system is broken. We have a backlog of cases of 700,000 cases. That's a system that does not function. And you see the problem when people come into the country and they're paroled into the country for 3-4 years and they don't get their hearing, either they don't attend the hearing. What you end up is you then have people build up their rights. They then have children in this country. They've got jobs in this country. And you say, well, how can we now deport them? And that's the tension that we've seen develop in the asylum system. So the answer is we have an asylum system which is thoroughly broken.
Thank you. Now, before we go on, we'll get oral questions from new individuals, but we learned that Alan was also superintendent of education for the state of California. Be prepared here, you are getting educated on these issues. We have some more good questions, but I saw several hands from the audience. 2 in the back, 1 up front, another one in the back, please.
Ellen, when you were giving your presentation, a brief history of immigration law and all that, when you got to 1993, 1994, you talked about a step up in border security, and I was expecting you to talk about NAFTA.
Yeah.
Most people recognize the connection there. Would you care to comment?
Yeah, so NAFTA, which correctly started the North American Free Trade Association, was something that was a dramatic change in our economic relationships. Actually had a very difficult, a very dramatic effect on Mexico because of changes taking place there. But it actually led to a vast expansion of trade between the United States and Mexico. Our trade in 1993 was $80 billion. Today it's just under $700 billion, our trade with Mexico. It also led to a fair amount of readjustment in Mexico because of the movement of people out from the countryside into the cities without employment. Mexico now is a robust, very robust economy, increasingly able to provide jobs to its people. In the first years of NAFTA, it could not do that. We saw a very large increase in the number of people coming north toward the United States and either stopping in northern Mexico, where most of their industrial activities take place, or coming into the United States. But NAFTA was a game changer in terms of the relationship between Mexico and the United States. And while it took another 10 or 20 years to bring the two countries together in terms of border cooperation and political cooperation, it clearly has been the major changing fact in the last 25 years, and will continue to change our lives. Mexico and the United States and Canada are actually the future, and I hope to go through that a little bit more tomorrow night. North America is our future. We now have $1 trillion a year in trade with Mexico and Canada, more than $1 trillion a year, which is one of the reasons why with all due respect, President Trump, who came into office saying he was going to scrap NAFTA, actually just renegotiated it. Because in fact, farmers, and this was largely his recognition that many of the agricultural products grown in this country are actually sold to Mexico. So when he started to hear that where is all of the corn of Kansas going, where are all the soybeans going, where are a fair number of the cherries and the apples going, we realized that this is not something we could walk away from, but rather had to embrace. So, yes, NAFTA has been the single most important cause of change in the relationship between Mexico and the United States over the last generation.
Thank you. An audience question? There were two. Someone has the microphone, and then we can come back.
Alan, I'm concerned about the impact of locally, but throughout the country, but locally, about the impact of pickups on a family. How are we thinking about what happens when the breadwinner is taken away, maybe no communication, children are left without a guardian or certainly in shock? That has a tremendous impact on those children and what kind of people they grow up to be. And we want them to be responsible and be cared for when they're young, but we're doing just the opposite.
So,
how is that being thought?
Yeah, so this is where I differ with the Trump administration, because they are pretending that there's a wand, that you can wave a wand and you can remove, and when you wave that wand, what you're basically doing is giving every individual immigration officer, whether wearing a green shirt or a blue shirt or CIS, you're giving them discretion to make those decisions. And from my perspective, those should be decisions that are governed by policies that are reflective of what a community wants. So for example, I'll be very straightforward. It's such a pleasure not to be in the government. I can speak my mind. The fact of the matter is that that if I'm an undocumented person, a breadwinner, and I've came here illegally 7 or 10 years ago, and I've had 2 children here who are American citizens, the question is, does the community around me want me to be deported, as opposed to someone who's perhaps committed a felony and should be deported? The results of a broken immigration system really demand something that we have failed at in this country, which is we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to actually look at all of these issues at one time so that we can make decisions about what we want to correct and what we want to enforce. Right now, we're in a situation where we have very heated rhetoric that's anti-immigrant, and it translates into giving authority to any particular officer who runs across an undocumented person to take enforcement action. I don't think that's the way we can do it, because there is no wand. And what in effect we're doing is we've walked away from the need for comprehensive immigration reform and for looking at this as a problem of the society that requires a comprehensive response. And we end up with decisions such as separating children from their families to create a deterrent on a so-called zero tolerance. All of these are, again, with all due respect, they're more directed to political effect than they are to achieving something that will be good for our society. There is no wand. There is no wand, and unless we actually grapple with the fact that we say, okay, that breadwinner has been here illegally for 7 years. That's not a good situation. We created that situation, and it is not healthy for either that family or the society. Therefore, but should he be arrested, detained, and deported? No, we should have another option that permits some kind of through a comprehensive immigration reform, to regularize the status. And frankly, we came close to that under the leadership of John McCain and the so-called Group of Eight 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And had the House not been torn by immigration, torn by the anti-immigrant dimensions of House politics, we'd have comprehensive immigration reform that would have addressed a whole series of these issues. In the moment, you could see why we have a polarized situation in our country. You expressed the point of view that says, we don't want to separate this father and breadwinner from his children who are citizens. On the other hand, you have another one of our citizens says, but Alan, this person is here illegally. This person jumped the queue and had no right to come into this country and came in illegally. You know, this is the tragedy of contemporary American politics. There's a germ of truth in each of those positions. But instead of doing what we've tended to do in American society is sit down and compromise, figure out how we're going to solve the problem, we just shout at each other. He's here illegally, deport him. How can you deport him? He's got family here and we don't want to be acting in an unhumanitarian way. That's the nub of our problem.
I just have to, point of order here, please, Alan. You wanted this to be a dialogue. My understanding is that people who come into the country for the first time are not committing a misdemeanor, but a civil infraction. That may or may not be true. But my understanding is that the waiting list to come into this country from Mexico or other countries in Central America is longer than 10 years. There really, in fact, is no legal way for most of those people from that area to come into this country. Is that not true?
No, look, the fact of the matter is there is a queue. You go to the embassy, to the consular office in the foreign country, and you apply for a visa. If you don't get the visa, then you can't enter the country. But people are getting visas here, regularly. There are 1 million people a day who are coming into the country, a large number of whom have got their visas, from the embassy. So, but the fact of the matter, there is a queue. But you're certainly not suggesting that if I can't get into the country, if I don't have a visa, that I have a right to enter illegally.
Well, actually, if a person is seeking asylum from the chaos in Central America, which the United States has exacerbated, first through support of the El Salvadoran government, and then later, I believe it's the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, when gang members from LA were deported back to Central America, they used that business model that they learned here to actually take over those countries. They're basically kleptocracies. I know people who have fled there because their child they were told, you have to give us your child or we'll kill you.
John, do you have a question?
The question
Please.
is, there's a point of order. It's a fact that we have disrupted the economy of Central America through various practices, and these people have a legitimate asylum claim, and we have a moral obligation and an obligation recognized under international law to grant them asylum, and we're perfectly capable of doing that.
John, thank you.
The answer is, again, the asylum law is actually not intended to, as much as we'd like to have the humanitarian point of view that you're expressing, which is that here's misfortune and people have a right to claim asylum and therefore they have a right to come into this country. The fact is that the asylum law is not designed to address every misfortune that's visited on human beings around the world. I mean, look, I wish I could fix every unhappy family that exists, but the fact of the matter is the immigration law is not designed, and the asylum law is not designed to address every injustice in the world and to give everyone who's subject to injustice in the world a right to enter this country. I wish we could do that, but that's just not realistic. It's just not the way the world is.
Okay,
We have a woman right here, and then we
Thank
have
you.
another woman right here.
the little red light will go
But
on.
this is a good dialogue.
Yeah, good, thank you.
So one thing I want to say is,